You're in Poland, is that right?
That's right. Yeah. But I am British. So
Yeah,
I'm
kind
not
of.
Polish, of course. Some people have been confused about that on Twitter. Um,
Oh
they've
yeah.
assumed that I'm Polish, you know. So.
Oh, so what brought you to Poland?
Oh, work reasons really. But now I have a family, so
Okay.
here I'm married a Polish woman. We have a couple of children, so you know I'm pretty much kind of gone native, you know. So this is this is my life now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I know one Polish woman. Her name is Dorota, Dorothy, I guess in English. And
Yeah,
yeah, she happens to live in Britain, so it's kind of the inverse of what you did.
yeah. A lot of Poles went to Britain following the 2004, you know, sort of ascension, so to speak, to the EU of Poland. So they had the right then to go to Britain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's some controversy over how much of Brexit is driven by a kind of colorblind, low-key xenophobia. The word xenophobia is really loaded, I know, but um,
Yeah.
yeah. So either a kind of perfectly supply of labor or economistic concern, or just a kind of racist thing, right? And so people would say, well, um, a lot of the people who voted for Brexit aren't happy about the Polish coming into England too and taking jobs, so they're not racist. So I don't know, but I guess some of the
Um,
concern is.
mhm. I think to some extent it's a reaction to what Baudrillard called the global, and the sense of things becoming homogenized and national identity being obliterated, basically, in this process. Now, whether Brexit, you know, can actually counter the global in the way that was envisaged, I think is debatable, really. You know, is there a political solution to the global? I think not strictly political solution.
Yeah, I'm familiar with kind of a lot of classical liberal arguments, and where one counter to the notion that national identity is being subsumed or overcome is, well, that's not the end all be all of one's identity, right? People create identities within market societies that are more granular, more you could say, super localized, sort of subnational, but also just kind of sidestepping national or regional concerns entirely. They've got identities that are based around. To use an example from my own life, I was very into music at one point. I was a promoter, DJ.
Mhm.
They have things that they form their identity that are not particularly tied to a religion. I'm going to throw in there as well, but
Yeah.
nation. So
Well, it's funny, but Baudrillard himself said he was not really interested in what he called solid Frenchness at all.
yeah,
He didn't identify with that, but he did rather controversially, you know, towards the end of his life and his career, uh, voice some kind of not exactly support, but some noises of approval for you know the Le Pen, yeah, Marine Le Pen's party,
oh,
and yeah, and this cause brought made him, you know, basically cancelled, as we would say nowadays.
yeah,
That he said that this you know that the that Marine Le Pen was really, and her party were really the only revolutionary party since the Second World War in France. So you know this is obviously completely anathema to the left, yeah, which Baudrillard was once a part of. So yeah, this is an interesting point from him.
so the term revolutionary there, and whether
Mhm.
the legitimately revolutionary is the linchpin is primarily resistance to globalization. Is that what's feeding that opinion or that remark of it?
Yes, I think as well to as I touched upon in my Substack, um, to banalization, you know, things becoming banal and kind of flattened out, without any kind of transcendence possible. I think Baudrillard, though in the book America, which I covered in that post, he is surprisingly kind of comfortable with this notion of what he called the desertification of signs and men, a kind of which I link to banalization, becoming banal, which he covers, at length really in his books. But I think America is unique in his in all of his amongst all of his books, in that he is kind of optimistic and serene. Really, is a kind of serene acceptance of this. And I think this may be because this book, America, was inspired by a kind of mystical obsession, which the other books maybe are not. That they are more calculated and more philosophical, whereas this was a kind of a mystery. Why, what was this obsession about, that he was trying to get to the bottom of, this obsession with America, and the book was a product of that. So that's, I think, why that book is so different to the others. And it's also my favorite, I would add.
Well, I'm not super familiar with Baudrillard. I do know he had a book called The Iraq War Did Not Happen. I might be getting the title wrong, or maybe that's an article.
Yeah, the Gulf War did not take place.
Okay, yeah, cool. Yeah, and that was, well, that had to have been 1990 or 91, I guess. I remember. Yeah, the Iraq War was began very late 1990, and it was really brief. I mean, when we consider, relative to 2003 Iraq War, 2001 Afghanistan. But yeah, it's launched late 1990, was early 91. So I'm guessing that book, it must have been 91. So really, America and Gulf War Did Not Happen are the only ones I'm even superficially familiar with.
But the Gulf War did not take place really kind of fits into his later, I think, pessimism and his kind of really quite biting critique of the West generally, where he really turns against the West in a sort of big way. And although he's been critical all the way through his career, and most, I suppose, kind of lightly or humorously in America, but when you get to the Gulf War Did Not Take Place and the books after that, then the critique is very harsh, and that book, The Gulf War Did Not Take Place, it's not really that, it's not saying that that the event did not happen in some kind of absurd way, but he was playing off that, he was playing off that kind of image of himself in the media, that he was some kind of reality denying lunatic. He was playing off that, but he was saying something serious in that the Gulf War is not really a war, but it's a kind of a technical operation or an extermination. And the victims really are those men of the Iraqi army who died in vast numbers.
I'm sorry, I'll just add that America, from a kind of a geopolitical or anti-imperial perspective, America became increasingly unlikable after the end of the Cold War. And so in the 80s, you could say, well, America isn't the only player in this. There's a rival superpower, and so some of what America's producing can be thought of as less sinister. But and then post Cold War, as there was no one else to really to counterbalance the weight of the U.S., it became sort of unlikable by default, even if a lot of its cultural production was still funny, amusing somehow. And it seems like his 1986 book America did get into a lot of its cultural output. Even with the same sort of entertaining cultural output, just the way it's framed in your mind is less acceptable and more upsetting.
America. I'm old enough just about to remember what it was like in the 80s.
I'm 43. I remember the 80s.
And Reagan's America did have a kind of aura about it, which even I myself, I and my friends really could pick up on. I think we were aware of this kind of magical aura that the period had and the country had in that time. And I think Baudrillard is also very attuned to that. There was something about that era for sure. And then I believe that he felt that after the 80s, really, in the end of the Cold War, and the sort of rise of computing, the internet, and so on, that America was going into decline, and a kind of nihilism was taking hold, which had always been kind of in the background, I suppose, of American modernity, a kind of possibility of nihilism. But it was really taking hold then, from about the 90s onwards, and he talks about in the one late book, Carnival and Cannibal, which is a very late book, just 2007, the year of his death. He's talking about Schwarzenegger's election as governor of California.
Yeah,
and he's talking about this kind of America is really descending into a farce. We have, I think, really the first kind of intimations of clown world. What we now know as clown world. Here, where it's kind of everything is becoming farcical and ridiculous.
yeah,
and he saw that.
Well, I would say that Reagan was also a former celebrity, and he seemed to have a somewhat more positive outlook on Reagan's in America. But yeah. So Schwarzenegger, celebrity that went into politics like Reagan, but I feel Reagan moved toward the sort of civil side of politics, whereas by the time Schwarzenegger came around, politics was moving toward crude celebrity culture. So the directionality had flipped.
Yes. I mean, Reagan did have some experiences as a politician. Of course, he was the governor of California himself before he became the president, and
for that for years. So
it wasn't completely ridiculous that he became the president, but I think this is not only the farcical, not the only farcical thing that Baudrillard sort of identified about America in the early 2000s, really, but that things in general were just taking a kind of farcical turn, which we can now see that playing out. It's become pretty obvious to everyone, I think, especially with the COVID situation, where we just have these lockdowns, which I think clearly have been quite harmful to the economies of the West, and also with the whole vaccine regime, where the vaccines don't even seem very effective, and they're being forced upon people. I think Baudrillard would, if he was around today, he would say, well, all this confirms what I thought in 2007. Things were becoming increasingly absurd, ridiculous in the West.
It's interesting on the lockdown thing. I mean, this might just be splitting hairs, and I'm coming from a kind of too deep inside the West perspective, but America's not actually the one leading the kind of ultra lockdown mentality, and because it's state capacities, the term that gets thrown around, because America's state capacity isn't quite as strong. Frankly, it's not as functional as like a Northern Europe or I guess Sweden aside maybe, or Australia or New Zealand. It's not able to impose lockdowns as effectively, and so there's a little bit of a kind of global South dysfunction and resistance to a kind of strong state imposing lockdown within even within California, which is a very blue state, very progressive. There's too much chaos on the ground to really see it enforced too well.
Right. I mean, this brings us back to to America, and Baudrillard saying that America is the last remaining primitive society. But he's saying that as a positive thing. Baudrillard was very positive about primitive societies. He's always looked favorably on so-called primitives as being kind of more vital and more in touch kind of with the roots of life, really, than the kind of over intellectual Europeans. So it was a compliment to say that America was a primitive society.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe a country like Greece. If I'm going to find a country in
mhm,
Europe, it's not that I visited there, but it seems to be a bit less functional and a bit chaotic on the ground. Maybe low trust in government, low trust in media,
mhm.
a little more like the U.S. But yeah, in general, Europe is not so just kind of perennially individualistic, even if no one kind of self-consciously adopts an individualist attitude. It just sort of it ends up manifesting that way, just from a high level. Just these kind of rivalrous little individuals doing their thing without a kind
Mhm.
of shared national consciousness that's very effective. Um, anyway,
I mean, when I look at I've posted about I think yesterday about the Anglosphere, the dominant mode and mood of the Anglosphere now is that of farce. That all things have now seem to have a tendency or an inclination to become farcical. And I think this is I don't what is the reason for this? I don't think there's a single reason. There's no single reason that we can pinpoint. And Baudrillard would certainly not try to pinpoint, a kind of rational reason for this. It's a metaphysical problem, I think, with the Anglosphere, and I think what he talked about the virtual. Yes. For example, in the book, the 2004 book, The Intelligence of Evil, he talks about the reality that so what we call reality. The reality has been he says invented over the past few centuries is now dying out. So we're talking about scientific reality, essentially, the rational and the real. He believed that was dying out and it was being replaced by the virtual. So we might say, that this particle dimension is really coming from the virtual. The virtual is in a sense crazy. It's a sort of crazy new world which is rising up.
more and more, we are existing as kind of online versions of ourselves, virtual versions of ourselves before we're able to kind of present our IRL meat space self, our real self. So yeah, I mean, so one example of that is online dating, which is now completely normative, and if you sidestep that, you're kind of weird. Whereas I recall when online dating was new, and the people who did that, they were the weird ones. So you have to present a kind of online version of yourself to act a kind of proxy for you, and that which is just now just how everyone lives on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, and
Increasingly.
I think that online self can take over. Really, people are using filters to present themselves, and I think that becomes them in their minds. That they forget about the filter, and that's me, on the screen, and I think probably in the future there will be technology which will be, kind of like cyborg technology, so that those filters will be permanent in a sense, that you will look at somebody and you will see whatever filter they have on themselves. This kind of craziness, really, which we are kind of moving into.
This rise of the metaverse would just put this virtual self, virtual reality notion into permanent practice, which would be odd. I mean, I want to say bad, but I almost feel like a hypocrite because I'm certainly everything that's developed thus far, if asked outright ahead of time, does it sound bad? I'd say yes, but it just ends up becoming part of the kind of banality of everyday existence that doesn't feel bad viscerally. It just is.
I know what you mean. Yeah. I mean, there's this kind of ad which appeared for the metaverse. Yes, with the Henri Rousseau painting, which comes to life, and a lot of people have kind of remarked on kind of the bad vibes of this video, that it just feels kind of creepy.
What is it you're talking about? I'm sorry, you say
well, there's a video for the metaverse, which is coming out, and it's a few sort of zoomers in some art gallery, and they're looking at a painting of one of Henri Rousseau's paintings of the jungle. I think in Papua New Guinea or wherever he took inspiration for those paintings. And you have a tiger, kind of stylized tiger, and some other creatures, and they sort of come to life, and sort of dancing around to this beat. And there's something very creepy about this video, which people have remarked upon. And I assume this is not intentional creepiness.
But it's just, I've seen the video of Mark Zuckerberg being interviewed by some Zoomer wearing a jacket. Is that the same one?
No, this is a different one. I mean, you can check it out. But they just kind of animated these figures from the Rousseau painting, and Rousseau put some kind of masks on these animals. He was interested in primitive art and so on. I think he was himself what do you call it? Was an outsider artist. He wasn't formally trained, as I remember. And and they've kind of brought this painting to life. But the way these animals move, there's something kind of creepy and unsettling about it. And I'm sure it wasn't intended, but it's just the outcome of the thing. So some people are seeing that as a kind of bad sign of the whole enterprise. Really,
is that creepiness meant to be a sort of preview of what life in the metaverse is going to be like?
I think it's kind of an inadvertent preview. I don't think it was meant to. You don't want to creep out your audience usually if you're trying to sell a product, right? But they managed to do it. And there's also some paintings by a famous theosophist in the background of this, kind of like before you go into this Rousseau painting. There were some paintings by I can't remember her name now, but she was a kind of very early abstract painter, even before Mondrian, really. And her paintings were kind of inspired by theosophy, this occult philosophy, really. Some people call it religion, although Madame Blavatsky, who was really the founder of this movement, insisted it wasn't a religion. But anyway, it was an occult movement, and these paintings are seen in the background of this, kind of behind the figures, these young Zoomers who are looking at this Rousseau painting. So some people have seen some significance of that. And we've got this kind of, I mean, I'm not a subscriber to it myself, but this kind of notion of the satanic elite, right? Which is governing the world. Yeah,
it drives the QAnon people.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of posted about this a bit. Yeah, that the reason I don't believe in such an elite. I think the Western psychology, I think is a kind of a do-gooder psychology, essentially. The Westerners, that we are all kind of so influenced by Christianity, but I think not only Christianity but also Greek philosophy, and the importance of the good, the rational, compassion, and so on. That we all kind of feel drawn to realize these ideals, even though often, I think most of the time, really, we have no clue how to do that, and we are kind of deluded in our belief that we are doing that. I said in one post that it's really do-goodism uninformed by prudence, which is the Western disease, and I think that's what we are seeing, really, in a kind of acute form with all the kind of politics of today, where all there's a kind of hyper focus on various minority groups who are understood as oppressed, by the left now. And
it's thought that a lot of so-called woke thought is sort of basically heretical Christianity. But it's interesting.
Yes.
It's interesting how the accusation that the elites are Satanists is itself kind of evidence for what you're saying. We have a sort of Christian mindset. The conspiracy people on the ground are like driven by a Christian-informed idea that Christianity's enemies, the devil, are in charge. So
that's right. And I did, again, I posted about this a couple of days ago, that really, kind of in the West, we sort of have this assumption, widespread assumption, that if the outcome is evil, then it must have been evil that was intended, right? I mean, in a kind of just universe, that must be the case. But really, I don't think that is the case. And often, when somebody tries to do good, if they aren't really up to the job of doing good, then the outcome can be evil, sometimes great evil, occasionally anyway. And this kind of idea of this mismatch, this kind of arbitrary mismatch almost between our intentions and the outcome is sort of a little bit scandalous in the West, really. It's a Western thought. So we, there is this kind of tendency to assume that all these bad things we see happening, there must be some bad intentions behind them, right? Very bad intentions. But I think really the elite, of Western societies think they are doing good, and they want to do good. But they may be quite, in some cases, pretty deranged, these people, and they don't know what they're doing.
What you're saying sounds somewhat like, the classical liberal argument that well intentions can pave the road to hell, that kind of thing, or that
Exactly.
people are largely acting in a maybe a sociotropic or altruistic manner, but the outcome is greater than the sum of their individual intentions, and things go wayward.
Well, sometimes just neutral intentions. Somebody who wants to get rich, he doesn't necessarily harbor any ill will to anyone, but he wants to get rich. And this, in the current, state of the world, things like the BlackRock takeover of vast swathes of property. I'm not saying that's, there's a really malign intention behind that, but I think there's just a kind of greed, which is driving that, not necessarily an intention to kind of put people under the thumb, and turn them into serfs or slaves, but that could be the outcome of that, So I think that's where I would differ from a lot of this kind of satanic elite talk, really, where there's a kind of, there's two dimensions to it, really. First of all, there's the insistence that the intentions are purely malign, kind of full of hate for ordinary people and hostility. And the second one is really the kind of quite extreme idea, that these people are carrying out satanic rituals, that the astral world tragedy is a ritual sacrifice, this kind of ideas.
Oh, I hadn't heard that one. Wow.
Oh, you haven't heard that one, right?
Yeah. So, so you're definitely in tune with what, not just American politics, but a lot of news out of America. So you heard about that concert.
Yeah, just kind of by camping on Twitter, really. And these, I pick up on these things, and although I'm kind of sort of associated with right-wing Twitter, I wouldn't say I was kind of right-wing as such.
I know exactly what you mean. I think, like kind of vaguely leftist, or even more than that, but just not in tune with kind of corporate-driven wokeness. Basically, everyone in that space, all the way out to some kind of QAnon right, are generally lumped into the same broad side against the kind of mainstream center. It's.
That's right. I mean, kind of, I started out with the name right modernist, and really, I think the modernist part was more important, because I do consider myself a modernist, and I am kind of, I have a kind of, fondness for modernity, really, which I think a lot of those people on the right don't have. They have quite the opposite feelings, and this is one reason why America is my favorite book, of Baudrillard's, is that it is so, it's just a kind of a poem, really, a kind of a celebration of American modernity of the late 20th century, and it is just intoxicating.
Are you familiar with Bruno Macias, the Portuguese?
No.
I believe he's Portuguese thinker. Yeah, he has written a book recently. Essentially, it sounds like restating the thesis or the perspective of that book America by Baudrillard. He said a lot of American politics is just driven by fantasy, really, and politics on the ground is just there's a lot of LARPing for more radical politics that weirdly doesn't end up reaching the upper echelons of American society and driving it all over the ground. There's a strange bifurcation there where fairly sort of, practical, somewhat boring politics is still running the show and keeping the economy strong and sending corporations into, sky high profit territory. But if you were to just watch a lot of viral videos and just be, experiencing America on the ground, it feels much less functional than it actually is. And he talks about how that kind of dysfunction and craziness at the bottom informs a lot of politics